So today we're going to look at fuel line continuity, or basically is the fuel getting from the gas tank all the way up to the motor. So we're going to start off by looking inside of our gas tank. We're going to want to see that we have fuel and we have our pickup there that is submerged in gas. So we can see down inside the tank here, we can see the that little black and white pickup with a little screen on it that there is fuel from there. Next, you'd want to come down your fuel line, make sure that's connected tightly there. Obviously, this is just screwed in. It's not a clip-on connector. Follow to the fuel line, come over to your primer bulb, squeeze the primer bulb a couple times, see how it feels. Note that it should take a little bit of time to reinflate when you let go. That just means there's fuel in there, and you can kind of squeeze and feel that it's a little hard to squeeze. It means there's fuel in there that's not just air, so you know there is fuel inside your primer bulb. And eventually, after enough squeezes, it should get hard. Like right now, I can't really even squeeze anymore because it's totally full of fuel all the way up, and it's a one-way valve. It prevents fuel from backflowing, so make sure that the arrow is pointed in the right direction there. So you got fuel flowing directly towards the motor. So fuel should be flowing towards the motor there. We'll go ahead and disconnect our fuel connector. And because we squeezed so many times on that primer bulb, there's a little bit of fuel pressure in there. Obviously, we see we have fuel flowing here. If you were unsure, you could take that little brass plug there, line that up. Normally it goes to our fuel inlet right there, where this time we could push on the other side. And as we're pushing on the other side there, we could pump our primer bulb and see if fuel came out. And if fuel came out, then we would know we got fuel going at least this far to the motor. So we'll go ahead, snap that back together. We'll follow along our fuel line here. We can just kind of loosely tug on it where we see it comes out the back side of the connector. Follow it along to our fuel strainer, and looking inside there as we squeeze the primer bulb, we should see a little bit of fuel moving around. So we can see some air bubbles and some fuel moving around through this strainer here. And then it moves through the strainer to the fuel pump. And so it comes in the fuel pump and then gets pumped out this direction to our carburetor. And lastly, it goes into the carburetor bowl, the bottom part of the carburetor there. So if you wanted to check and make sure you've got fuel all the way around, going all the way to the carburetor, you could take a flathead screwdriver. With your flathead screwdriver, you can check that there's fuel in the bowl of the carburetor by just taking this brass plug and our brass screw and undoing it just a few turns, not even all the way out. Just a few turns, and that confirms that you got fuel. You can see it kind of dripping out there. And so we know we have fuel in the carburetor bowl. If we want to see that, we make sure we were getting plenty of fuel, enough to run the motor, in fact, then we could take the screw all the way out. Because sometimes you could be getting fuel to your carburetor bowl, but maybe just not quite enough to really run the motor wide open throttle. Maybe the motor runs at first when you first fire it up and it runs good at low speed, but when you try to go fast, it dies out and stalls on you, and then after a few pulls or a few minutes, it'll restart again. That's an indication that you are getting fuel to the carburetor bowl, but not quite enough flow. So now with the screw removed, we'll go ahead and squeeze our primer bulb, and we can see that's quite a good rate of flow for fuel. The motor does not drink nearly that much, so we know we're getting plenty of fuel to this one. I've seen other motors, though, where you squeeze the primer bulb and it's just a very slow drip every few seconds. And that might be enough to run the motor at low speed, but certainly not at high speed. So we'll go ahead and reinstall our little screw here. And that's basically the end of the line for the fuel. If you're unsure if you have a plug somewhere or you aren't getting fuel all the way to the end here, you're not getting fuel to the carburetor, you could go ahead and just disconnect each connection where the fuel lines meet together, at the fuel pump, at the fuel strainer, at the fuel inlet, all your fuel connectors, and check sequentially along the line how far it gets. And if you find that it gets all the way out of the fuel pump through this hose here, and you disconnect this hose and it's getting all the way to the carburetor, but it's not coming out the little drain plug here on your carburetor bowl, then you could expect to have a problem with your float and needle valve, that your carburetor is not getting fuel that way. If, say you do have a full bowl full of fuel, and the motor still is behaving as if it's not getting fuel, even though there's fuel in the bowl and everything else is normal, you'd expect to have some plugged jets maybe. There's not mixing the fuel with the air. So say the motor runs when you spray starting fluid or hold a rag covered in gasoline or starting fluid to your air cleaner or your intake here, but it does not run without that. So you know that's getting air and spark but not fuel. then you would expect to have to rebuild your carburetor here and just clean that out and clean up all the passages there. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, shoot us a note on the website or leave it in the comments below. Hopefully you found this video helpful. Thanks for watching.